Hey, so I wanted to do a follow-up video to my previous one on the Foghorn bass, and this is the Foghorn bass from scratch, beginning to end. I felt like there was a lot of edits in the last video, and I wanted to do the absolute clearest take of how to make a Foghorn bass in Serum that I could do, so here it is. This is what the final sound sounds like. Yeah, so if you want to know how to make that, keep watching. All right, so today we're going to make a Foghorn bass in Serum starting from scratch. So we've got the init patch, and it's just a sawtooth that sounds like this. And that's not quite what we want. What we want in oscillator A is a sine wave. And so the easiest way to get a sine wave into an oscillator in Serum is to use the basic shapes wavetable, which we can find by clicking on default there, and then analog and basic shapes. And that's going to select the basic shapes wavetable. So we've got a sine wave now, and it sounds like this. Now it's really low. It might not come through on the speakers you're listening on, so I've gone up 2 octaves, and this is what a sine wave sounds like. It's a nice, clean, pure tone. Now there's another way to get a sine wave into oscillator A, which I use more often than using basic shapes, which is to use the wavetable editor. So that's this little pencil icon here. Let's pop that open. And you can see that across the top here, we've got a harmonic editor, which we'll cover in a minute. In the middle, we've got the waveform display and editor. And then across the bottom, we've got the wavetable editor. So we can click through the wavetable down here, just like with the wavetable selector in the main window. And in this middle window, we can edit the waveform that's being played. So it's no longer a sine wave, it's now this. And however, by using this harmonic editor up the top, we can actually draw in the individual harmonics that we want our sound to be composed of. So for example, the first harmonic is just a sine wave. Then we can add additional sine waves by drawing in additional harmonics. And you can see that the waveform display is updated. You can hear very clearly that that's just a collection of a couple of sine waves. Let's get rid of all of these other harmonics because we just want the first one for oscillator A. This is it, the same as before. You can see the rest of the wavetable still in here, but we're just not going to use it. That's fine. Let's close the wavetable editor, and we've got a sine wave in oscillator A. Now we want to work on oscillator B, but we don't need to hear oscillator A. Let's switch it off. Oscillator B also has a sawtooth, and we'll go down to the low note again. Okay, and we want to edit this wavetable. So pop the wavetable editor open again. Now you can see that the wavetable editor here is showing us something that isn't quite accurate. We've got one harmonic drawn here, but we've got a sawtooth here. I'm not really sure why the display chooses to display like this. So I don't know if it's a bug or if it's intended. But in order to get these things back in sync, we just need to edit the harmonics somehow. So let's get rid of this first harmonic. So now we've got an empty wavetable. And what we want to do in here to get our Foghorn sound is to pick 2 not related harmonics reasonably high up the frequency spectrum. So let's go with 13 and 27, for example. So that sounds like 2 sine waves that aren't really, they are harmonically related, but they're not tuned together. They're not directly harmonic, I guess. And that's all we need in this editor for now. We are going to come back to this editor towards the end of the tutorial and talk about some additions we can do in here, but that should do us for now. So now we've got these 2 high harmonics, and if we add in oscillator A again, we've got a very low subtone under them. Now with this sound, what we want to do is actually not hear oscillator B, but hear its effect on oscillator A. So I've turned down oscillator B, and we want to use FM from B in the warp modes on oscillator A. So I'll hold down a low note and I'll bring up the FM amount. You'll be able to hear the impact on the sound. You can hear how the sound is pretty screechy and synthetic and not quite right. It's a really kind of dry core sound, but we're going to turn that into a Foghorn by the end of this. Now I've also got the filter section. Let's switch that on, and we're using a low pass filter, so we're just taking off some of this top end extra high harmonics. give it a little filter drive just to make it a bit louder. Maybe a little resonance, but we're going to come back to this filter. That's all we need for now. Okay, so next we need to add distortion. So let's come over to FX and we'll hit the distortion module. And what we want to use is cross shaper. So cross shaper is actually two wave shaping distortions with a crossfade between them. The crossfade is accessed by using the drive knob. So you can think of this as being A and this as being B. So left is A, right is B. And we can switch, we can kind of cleanly move between them from A to B by using the drive knob. We want it all the way over on A, and we just hit edit A. And I'm going to play a note and just drag up the center of this wave shaper. Well, that's heaps. That's probably enough. You can hear how much louder that is, how much richer it is. And the interesting thing with this is that when we come back to the oscillator table, our filter is really going to impact the sound of the distortion. So I'm going to hold a note and move the cutoff knob around. You can hear we're getting that foghorn kind of vibe going on. So the next thing to do is to LFO up this cutoff. So I've assigned LFO 1 to the cutoff. Let's put it on trigger mode so it restarts every time we push a key. And I'm just going to draw in a shape that has done me well in the past. Let's try this. Now that's way too fast. We want to use 2 bars probably. Okay, let's give these some curves, see if we can get the proper classic foghorn going. Okay, we're probably using a little bit too much of the filter cutoff, and maybe this slope is a bit steep. Okay, we're kind of getting there. I suspect actually we've got too much FM going on. Let's bring that down. There we go, that sounds pretty classic to me. We could even have a slightly slower LFO. Let's bring these in so that they're faster relatively. And you can fine tune it a fair bit after you've got to this stage. So there's a lot of sweet spots possible, and you can kind of play around and get a whole bunch of different tones out of this. Now, because it's a bass patch that we've made here, we want to turn on mono because we don't really want polyphonic playing of this patch. It's not going to sound very nice playing chords. And we want legato on and a bit of portamento, maybe a bit less than a second, I would say. Because when the filter cutoff is moving and the pitch is sliding, this sounds really great. I'll try and get some nice slides going. So there we go. I've put it back to 2 bars, so it sounds like this again. Let's slow down these first 2 hits. Cool. Okay, now over to effects again. Let's make this a little more stereo. So one way to do that is to use hyper and dimension. Now to me that's a little bit too much. Let's bring the mix down. Dimension's also pretty good on this. Let's I've reduced the size and I'll bring the mix up just a tiny bit. Cool. So we're getting somewhere with that. The other classics on this sound are reverb and a bit of compression. Now what I like to do is move the compressor after the reverb, push the ratio up a little and bring the threshold down. And that way the reverb really gets squashed with the actual sound. It makes the reverb sound a lot more present, but also squashes it when the reverb's playing so that you don't really hear it so much over the actual sound. But you get a nice long tail out of that. The other options in here are that you could add some phaser or some chorus. Here it is with some phaser. Here it really pushing some extra harmonic content around, probably a bit less wet. And chorus can kind of wash it out a little bit. But it can also give it some nice roundness, maybe a bit less on the dry wet. Cool. Now, another thing that you can do is you can push up the top end a little bit. Just everything sounds a little bit more present with some top end, and with nice screeches out of a foghorn, it's not going to hurt. There we go. Now, in terms of other modulation options, you can also modulate the FM amount. Let's bring that down a tiny bit. And we'll go through the wavetable editor in a second, but let's do some macros first. So, obvious candidate for macros is the cutoff knob. So let's map that. So if you've got the LFO down a fair bit, you could use the macro knob to manually create some movement. Let's put the LFO back up because I like how that was going. The FM amount is another good one for a macro knob. So FM amount, in which case I would bring the base FM amount down and then dial this up a little. Let's bring it up. Sounds good there. And now for this third macro knob, what I like to do is to set up detune. So let's give it a name. And we'll put it onto the fine tuning of oscillator A and the fine tuning of oscillator B. But now we need to jump into the matrix to do some edits. What we want to do is set them to unipolar, so they only go in one direction, and 100 is way too much. We want to detune by, let's say, 25 up and 25 down. Now that means when we bring this knob up, the fine tuning amount will go up on oscillator A, but down on oscillator B. So let's jump back to here and we'll just bypass the filter automation for a second. And we'll bring the cutoff up. I hope you can hear that the detune just gives it this extra kind of wobble to it. Let's re-enable the LFO. Okay, cool. Now to get some more variations of this sound, what we can do is create a whole wavetable dedicated to these extra harmonics that we talked about before. So pop open the wavetable editor, and currently we've got one position filled. In fact, let's put a less harmonically high wavetable together. So let's draw in 9 and leave 13 there, but get rid of whichever one it was that we had a second ago. So now our foghorn sounds like this. It's much lower. And we'll add another slot in the wavetable, and we'll take out 9, leave 13, but we'll put in 17. You can hear that the growl has moved up. We'll just keep going like that. So we'll get rid of 13, but we'll put in 22. Cool. So we'll add another one. We'll get rid of 17. Increase the volume of 22. Let's try 27. Oh, that sounds pretty growly. So this is probably our last one. We'll do 27 and 33. What's that giving us? 5. Oh, that sounds fine. Let's go with that. Now what we can do is we can scroll through those wavetables like this. But you can hear how that steps a bit. So if we want to make that a nice smooth rotation through, we can open the wavetable editor again, and we can use morph and spectral to kind of spectrally fade between them all. Now, if we jump back out of the editor again, you can see that we fade between all of those positions nice and smoothly. And I'll play the note and wind through them as well. But you can see that it moves around a bit in terms of volume. So let's jump into the editor again. And our last step in here is just process, normalize each gain separately, which helps it keep a little more consistent a volume as you scroll through them. So now you can get a whole bunch of different variations on your Foghorn by manipulating this table. You could even macro this up now and get small variations of the source sound as you go. Maybe give it some more detune. Maybe we'll bring the FM amount down. So there you go. That's making a Foghorn bass in Serum from scratch, from beginning to end. All right, that was the Foghorn bass beginning to end. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.